Okay, thanks for being here this evening. My name's Kevin Conover, and we are on the radio down here in Southern California, FM 106.1 in North County, and we're also on K-Praise 1210 AM, the largest Christian radio station down here in Southern California. And of course, we're podcast all over the place. And we've got hundreds and hundreds of interviews up on educateforlife.org. If you want more resources and you're looking for more interviews with people from all types of life experience. It's a fantastic place to look at the creation evolution discussion, the issue over the pro-life movement, what's happening currently, school choice and vouchers, and everything that you can possibly imagine that's happening in our culture. There are wonderful interviews with experts who love God, who love Jesus, and are ministering in various ways around the world. So feel free to check that out, educateforlife.org. And I'm your host, Kevin Conover. Our guest this evening is, I've never had an interview with somebody whose ministry is in this area, but Vincent Lampert is the pastor of St. Michael and St. Peter parishes in Brookville, Indiana. In 2005, he was appointed the exorcist for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. At the time, there were only 12 priests in America who were exorcists. Currently, there are over 100. He received his training in Rome, and he's a member of the International Association of Exorcists. He is also the author of Exorcism, The Battle Against Satan and His Demons. Father Vincent, thanks for being here this evening.
Yes, Kevin, it's good to be with you.
Yeah, it's funny. I saw an article on you on I believe it was Glenn Beck's site, and I thought, oh man, that sounds really interesting. What caught my eye was the rise in exorcisms that you mentioned, and I thought, because I had just an experience just recently. I'm a high school Bible teacher, and I had an experience with somebody who called me up and said, "Mr. Conover, we're having trouble with a family member, and I need advice. I need some guidance. I'm not sure what to do." And I've seen this a variety of times now where families are struggling, and there seems to be a connection between drug abuse and what looks like demonic activity. And I was curious. I really wanted to know about this because I think it's really relevant to us as Christians, is what is going on in the spiritual world, and also how the spiritual world works. Because a lot of people, I think, don't know what they're engaging in when they begin to entertain certain activities. Is there a connection between drug use and demonic activity?
Absolutely. Many of the drugs before they reach the market in the United States go through satanic rituals. They're actually commended to Satan in special rituals that are performed. And then when people consume these, they kind of enter deeper into the world of darkness, Satan's deception. So there very much is a correlation between drug abuse and a rise in demonic activity.
So I'm really curious about this. I mean, we're just going to hop right into here to the deep end. I'm really curious about the metaphysics of this. I've had people talk to me about this. They'll say something like, well, is it mental illness? I mean, I know somebody who has schizophrenia, and one time I asked somebody, is schizophrenia demonic, or what is going on there? And my question pertains to what is happening spiritually when a person engages in drug use or whatever it be. What's going on with that demonic entity and the person's spirit that causes them to act so crazy? What's the metaphysics behind that?
I would say, first of all, that faith seems to be in decline in the lives of many people, especially in the Western world. Christianity built Western civilization, and yet there's a lot of people today who, even though they grew up in a traditional Christian home, may be turning their backs on their faith, and they're turning to pre-Christian religious traditions that may have some connection with the demonic world. The devil doesn't really care if somebody is doing something either directly, meaning they know it's wrong, it goes against God, but they do it anyway, indirectly because they think it's fun and entertaining, but they may not fully understand the gravity of the situation they may be putting themselves into. So this whole notion of a rise in demonic activity has to do with the decline of faith, especially across the country.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, we saw it with, I believe they put what was it, a Baphomet statue up in Illinois in the Capitol. Is that right?
They did. And even many hospitals today, when you go in, if you want to check your religious affiliation, you can actually check Satanism as your religion.
Yeah, and I know that every year I have my students go and interview somebody from another religion, and there are all kinds of covens and witchcraft all over San Diego, as well as I know around the rest of the country and the world. But and so definitely seems to have become more acceptable. I had a student of mine said he went to a concert. He goes to UCLA. He said he went to a concert, and at the concert, it was an open air concert. He said literally there was a giant statue that everybody was like praising. And he's a Christian kid, and
Mhm.
he just had this, kind of epiphany, like what is happening right now? And it kind of freaked him out. He actually turned to the guy next to him and he said, "Hey, doesn't this seem weird to you what we're doing right now?" Because it was basically idolatry. It was worshiping
Mhm.
some statue. And these are a bunch of college kids. And the other kid didn't even flinch. It didn't even phase him. And he just said, "I got to get out of here." And he left, thank God. But there does seem to be this incredible acceptance of it. And it's something you hear about in other countries. I've had missionary friends who have said this stuff is very prevalent in other countries. I had a pastor in Africa who talked about the witch doctor in his community and everything. But so does that mean, what does that mean for uh, America and our communities and our families when it comes to this acceptance? Do you expect that we're going to continue to see a rise in demonic activity in people's families and lives?
Yeah,
Demonic
absolutely.
influence? Yeah.
Absolutely. Because, I think it's the failure to understand some very basic biblical premises. So you talk about idolatry, it's a violation of the first commandment, where God says, I am the Lord your God, you shall not have strange gods before me. And oftentimes people are looking for a substitute for God. Think of the ancient Israelites on their way to the promised land when Moses is up on Mount Sinai receiving the Ten Commandments. He comes back, and what does he find them doing? They're worshiping the golden calf. They're choosing to worship something of their own creation rather than the uncreated God. And that premise of turning away from God is right there at the beginning of the Bible in the book of Genesis, when the serpent convinces Adam and Eve that they don't need God, that they can be God themselves. You know, Satan wanted to take the place of God, and he tries to tempt us to take the place of God as well. There are a lot of people today that I believe live by three guiding principles. Number one, you may do whatever you wish. Number two, no one has the right to command you. And number three, you are the God of yourself. And this viewpoint leaves no room for God. And then the devil can use that as an opportunity to try to enter into a person's life. Whenever I work with somebody in the ministry of exorcism, the number one question that I want to answer is this: what was the entry point? What did the person do, either directly or indirectly, that permitted the demon to afflict them? Because for the most part, Christians don't have to worry about the devil. If you're going to church, you're reading your Bible, and you're praying, the devil's already on the run. We don't have to do anything extraordinary to defeat the devil. It's the very ordinary aspects of our Christian faith. But sadly, a lot of people today just don't know those basics. And because they don't know the basics, they can be falling into the traps that the devil is setting for people to fall into.
That's great. I had a student who told I had a exorcist-like experience when I was younger, maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago, with a student in our church youth group. And I actually asked him that exact question that you just said, which was, when did this demon start to have influence over you? And he said to me that when he was younger, he was very scared. He was in Europe. The drinking age was very young, he said, and he would be left alone for long periods of time. His parents would just let him go do whatever he wanted. He was only like 14 years old. And he said that he was so scared that he figured out if he made himself very angry, people would be afraid of him. And he said one time when he was doing this, a voice said to him, "I can help you if you let me in." And he said, "Yes, come in." And he said that was the moment at which stuff started to happen, that he started to lose control over his life, meaning he had a harder time reading the Bible. The pages, the word is it was to me it was just like out of a movie. The words would become blurred in the Bible. He couldn't hear things that people were saying if they began to talk about God. He would start to lose his breath if he tried to pray. Just a lot of really crazy things, and that really opened my mind to the impact of the demonic world. Is that the kind of stuff that you see a lot where somebody, what are other, when you said entry points, what are other entry points where a person, is this completely overt, or is this something that can passively happen that somebody needs to watch out for?
Yeah, it can be overt, meaning somebody does something directly opposed to the faith. And then, if they're just thinking that it's something fun and entertaining, that can also be an entry point for the person to deal with the demonic. Some of the main ways that I see that people open up a doorway to the demonic are ties to the occult. The word occult comes from the Latin word occultus, and it means secret or hidden, and it focuses on knowledge of the paranormal. Now, there's a power behind the world of the occult, but that power comes from the devil himself. So the devil is the one who provides the power to a lot of these things, whether it's people playing with a Ouija board, going to see a psychic or a medium, using a pendulum or a crystal, practicing magic, and so on. The power behind all of this is the power of the devil himself. One can be cursed. I think curses are only effective if someone is weak in their faith. We can't control what another person is doing. But as St. Paul says, if we're putting on the armor of Christ, someone may be trying to curse us, but it will have no impact on us whatsoever. Other entry points would be, I call it the entertainment industry. There's a lot of people today that are fascinated by things like Halloween, certain types of music, video games, certain types of literature. Again, all of these things create a fascination with the devil and the world of the demonic. And when people get engaged in these things, again, they can be opening themselves up to the forces of evil. And the devil doesn't even care, like playing with the Ouija board. If a person thinks it's just fun and entertaining, the devil's still going to use that as an opportunity to try to get a foothold into that person's life. Because ultimately, the devil, what he wants to do is to get us to buy into his lies, the deception. So like that young boy you were talking about, he bought into the lie. That deception led to division. He found himself broken. And then that division can lead to diversion. We look for something that we think is going to put the pieces of our lives back together. But if it's not God, it will always leave us even more broken and fractured. Think of a lot of addictive behavior today that people give into, the alcohol or the drugs. They think it's going to fill this emptiness in their hearts. But I think of that great line from St. Augustine, who lived the end of the 5th, early 6th centuries, when he said, "You have created us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." So nothing can satisfy the deepest longings of the human heart but God alone. But people will try to find a substitute for God, and then that diversion will lead to discouragement. People will lose all sense of hope, meaning, or purpose or direction in their life. So again, deception leads to division, which leads to diversion, which leads to discouragement. And that discouragement, when we arrive there, there's a crossroads. One pathway leads to death, always spiritual, the complete rejection of God. Think of the growing trend of atheism in society. Sometimes it leads to a physical death, the growing trend of suicide, or even euthanasia, where people believe that my life's no longer worth living. There's even a young lady I saw the other day in the Netherlands who was put to death at the age of 29 simply because she said she was depressed. Now, we're Christians, we're people of hope. The other pathway leads to discipleship. We have a reawakening, and we recognize that we need God in our lives, and we invite God back in.
So that's wonderful hope for somebody struggling with this. And that's so if there's a person and they're dealing with this, it's interesting to me because and you can explain this, why you chose to become an exorcist. And you said that there are more and more people. I guess the question is what is the role of an exorcist as this, as they're participating in essentially fighting demonic spirits? Are they a intermediary in the sense that they are appealing to God on behalf of this person and trying to separate this demonic influence because the person is so far beyond the pale that they can no longer, even if they wanted to, make the decision for Christ? Is that what's going on there?
Yeah, it goes back to that young boy you were talking about, how he tries to pray but wasn't even able to articulate the words, try to read the Bible, but the pages would blur. So there are people that need help getting out of the trap of Satan. Probably one of the best ways to understand exorcism is that I want to help people to make God more real in their lives as opposed to the devil. Because there's a lot of people that they focus on the devil, but really the ministry of exorcism is focused on the power of God. You think of the power of the name of Jesus Christ when demons will flee. So again, my overall goal would be to make God more real in their lives as opposed to the devil.
That's interesting, to make God more real. Can you break that down for us? What does that mean when you say to make God more real?
You know, one of the things I always say that makes Christianity unique in world religions is that Christianity is not about our search for God. It's about God's search for us. God always makes the first move. Think of Adam and Eve in the garden. After they sinned, they went and hid. God moves through the garden and calls out, Adam, where are you? Now, God knew where he was, but he's giving Adam an opportunity to repent, to acknowledge that he's in a state of sin. But Adam doesn't respond. He plays the blame game. You know, the woman you put here, she
Yeah.
did it. Eve, what have you done? Well, the serpent made me do it. You know, the devil can't make us do anything. The devil can propose, but he cannot impose. But then God, right after the sin, he expels Adam and Eve from the Garden of Paradise. And I would suggest that that's an act of mercy, because if Adam and Eve had approached the tree of life in a state of original sin, there would have been no hope for redemption. God sends them out into the desert, into the wilderness, and then God immediately puts a plan into place to go and search for lost humanity. And that comes to fulfillment with the coming of Jesus. You know, there in the Gospels, Jesus is baptized, and then the Spirit descends upon him, and then he's driven into the desert. Why does he go into the desert? I would suggest because he's going to look for lost humanity. But he first has to contend with the one who caused the fall of humanity, namely the devil. So Jesus faces his own temptation. He overcomes that temptation. And then I believe his entire public ministry is about looking for lost humanity. I love the story of the Good Shepherd who leaves the 99 and goes in search of the lost one. Who is the lost one? Lost humanity. The woman with 10 coins and loses one. Who is that lost one? Lost humanity. Now, many of us might say, well, 1 out of 100, 99% is pretty good. Or if I have 10 coins, I lose one, 90% is pretty good. But God wants 100%. And that's because every person matters in the eyes of God, because each and every person reflects the divine image. We're all created in the image and likeness of God. Therefore, God is always searching for us whenever we are lost. One of my great lines in the Bible comes from the book of Genesis, when God says, let there be light. The ministry of exorcism really is turning on the light of Jesus Christ in the lives of people who have fallen into the darkness of Satan and his lies.
Amen. So when you're saying make God more real than the devil, obviously God is as real as can be. So the question is that because they are unaware of his love, his power, his compassion towards them? Is that what you're saying, making them aware of that?
Absolutely. I think a lot of people fail to understand God's love and mercy, his unconditional love for us. I think there's a lot of people that believe that somehow God and the devil are on the same playing field, like they're equal in power and strength, if you will. But that's a sense of dualism. People need to realize that, Satan is still a creature, very intellectual, but he's still a creature. And no creature can be on the same playing field as God, the creator. Only God is supernatural. The word supernatural means to be outside of nature. And only God is outside of nature because God has created everything. The very first 10 words in the book of Genesis, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. What does that tell us about God? In the beginning, God creates time. The heavens, God creates space. The earth, God creates matter. So God is creator of time, space, and matter, which means God is outside of time, space, and matter. Now, I can say that, but it gives me a headache try to think about it because
Yeah.
we live in this reality, so it's what we know. So only God is supernatural, outside of nature. These angelic creatures that are fallen, these demons, Satan, and these other evil spirits, we would say they're preternatural, meaning they are above our understanding of nature. It's due to their highly intellectual nature. That's why when demons manifest, they can do things that we might say, well, that's not humanly possible, whether it's bodily contortions, whether it's, levitation, and all of these things. Demons are capable of doing this because, again, they're beyond our understanding of the natural order.
So you trained in Rome to become an exorcist. What does it mean to be trained to become an exorcist? What is the training that takes? Is this something that the average Christian could participate in, or is this something that it's not safe for them to be involved in that? What explain that to us.
I think the key ingredient to be involved in deliverance ministry, in exorcism ministry, is to be a man or a woman of faith.
Hmm.
I think it means to be, a godly man, a godly woman, because ultimately, I don't have any special powers and abilities. If people are relying on me, we're all in trouble. But if people are relying on the power and the authority of Jesus Christ in his name that is present in and through his ministers, that's the right mentality to have. I've encountered a lot of people today because faith is in decline. They view the exorcist as a magician.
Mm.
They think that I have special talents or abilities and I can make their problems go away. I've even had people tell me, I want the devil to be gone, but I want nothing to do with God.
Ooh, that's going to be tough.
That's going to be tough, absolutely. Because either we are in a relationship with God or we are in a relationship with the devil. To me, there's no in between. And we could be in a relationship with one or the other and maybe not be fully aware of it. And that's the importance of, people being catechized and learning their faith and just having a better understanding of their own life situation. I think that's what I mean too about making God more real. I think there's really a lot of people today that just do not have an image of God.
Mm.
And, they might say they believe in God, but if you ask them, well, what does that mean? They really can't explain it.
Mm.
But again, I think people need to fully understand the importance of faith and how it protects and safeguards them from the wiles of the enemy, of the devil.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was younger, and this was no coincidence, but I stumbled on a book. I wasn't even looking for this book, but it was called The Bondage Breaker. I don't know if you've heard of it or not. Have you heard of that book?
Yes.
Yeah. And this kid in the youth group, I met him at the same time. I happened to pull this book off a shelf and just started randomly reading it, randomly, right? Um, but it basically said reiterate these scriptures and have them repeat them after you. And when I did this with this young man, he actually his voice started dropping. He couldn't speak. Tears started coming. He was crying like profusely, and um, and was not sure what to do at that point because he looked like he couldn't breathe, and so I was like, "Whoa, what is happening?" I had never experienced anything like that before. And is this the kind of thing that you experience in this process? is this an ongoing process, or is it something that happens quickly, or is it just different depending on the situation?
It really is different depending on the person and the degree of evil they may be dealing with. So my internship in Rome, it's easy to read books and understand what the church believes and teaches about the reality of the devil and his afflictions on people. So over the 3 months that I lived in Rome back in 2006, the priest who trained me allowed me to sit in on 40 exorcisms that he performed during that time. And that allowed me to witness firsthand the church's ministry to those who were up against the forces of evil and who were trying to really find a solution for that and invite God more deeply into their lives. But I've done this ministry now for the past 19 years. I've done exorcisms over a course of a year before the person is fully liberated.
Oh,
I've done
wow.
exorcisms where 45 minutes later after praying, the person is liberated. So each case really is different just because of all the personal circumstances of the person and the degree of the demonic affliction they may be suffering from.
Um, so I took a class in my master's program too. It was called Demonology, studying what was going on there metaphysically and so forth. And my professor at the time said that he had had a really bad experience one time because people would call the university and he was referred to, even though he wasn't technically, he wasn't an exorcist or anything, but because he taught the class and this was one of his specialties, he would go, and he said one time he touched a person and he just completely froze. And he said you have to be very careful because you're dealing with powerful spirits, and it's not something you want to treat lightly. Can these demons physically harm a person? Are you ever afraid for your own safety in these kinds of situations?
I would first say that demons don't have a free reign to do whatever they want.
Mm.
They're still on God's leash, if you will. Satan may have been cast out of heaven, but he wasn't cast out of creation. So God can still use the devil for whatever greater purposes that he has. If the devil had complete free reign, the world may perhaps be more chaotic than it already is. So demons can only do that which God permits. Now, that might beg the question, well, why would God permit this? But again,
Mm.
that would be trying to understand the mind of God. But ultimately, for me, anything that God permits ultimately is to bring us into a deeper understanding of what we were talking about earlier, his unconditional love, mercy, forgiveness. Again, the notion that God is always looking for us because God loves us. And I think that's the bottom line in all of this. You
Mm.
think of turning on the light, and then you think of God, the light. Think of saints. You see a picture of a saint. What's around their head? It's a halo. They're not radiating their glory, they're radiating the glory of God.
Mm.
And I think in the ministry of exorcism, you have a godly man or a godly woman who's radiating really the glory of God. Demons will always flee. I always say to people, for example, demons are like cockroaches. You go into a room and there's bugs, and then you turn on the light. What do? They scurry for every crack and crevice.
Yeah.
So in an exorcism, the church is turning on the light of Jesus Christ into the lives of these people. And when that happens, the demons will flee. And that really is the casting out of the demons out of these people's lives. But again, it isn't enough just to have the demon gone. God has to be invited in. There in chapter 11 of Luke's gospel, it talks about how once the demon is cast out, it comes back and finds the house swept clean, meaning it's gone, that God hasn't been invited in. Then it goes and finds 7 other demons worse than itself, and they go and take up residence in that person so that their situation is worse than it was before. So again, that notion, yeah, I would even say casting the demon out is the easy part. Convincing a person to invite God in seems to be the more difficult part today.
So the people are not submitting their lives to Christ after they've gotten rid of demonic activity, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and there's even a strict protocol that it's used in the Catholic Church. A person needs to have some type of psychiatric evaluation. They need to have a physical examination. In many ways, I'm trained to be a skeptic, so I want to ask experts in the mental health field and in the medical field, in your evaluation of this person, is there anything about their condition that you can't explain based on your own knowledge and understanding and training? I would then do an intake questionnaire trying to determine what the entry point may have been. And then I would look for 4 signs of possible demonic possession: the ability to speak and understand languages otherwise unknown to the individual, superhuman strength, elevated perception, a negative reaction to anything of a sacred nature. These things would tell me that I'm no longer dealing with that person as an individual, but now a demonic entity that's treating that person's body as if it were its own. And then step 5 of the protocol, the last one, would be to help normalize the spiritual life of the person, either to help bring them back to their faith or maybe bring them to Christ for the very first time.
Okay, that was going to be one of my questions, was because I had a situation where I thought a person was being demonically influenced or whatever the case, and it was a very quick interaction. We were actually in a church, and one of the pastors or elders came by, and he said they took the guy away who was being very loud, and we were talking some scripture, and I said, "Do you think that guy's demonically influenced?" And he said, "No." He said, "I don't think so. I think that's a mental issue." And I didn't know, okay, how do you tell between somebody who's having a mental issue versus being demonically influenced? And my other question in that regard is there ever overlap? Is there ever somebody who is both struggling mentally with mental illness as well as being demonically influenced?
I deal with people in the psychiatric world, so the mental health profession. And one of the ways that trying to understand, is the affliction due to a mental illness or due to demonic affliction? And this is the distinction that I've come based on my interactions with these experts in the mental health field. If it's something is interior, meaning it's originating from within themselves, that's probably a mental illness. If it's something exterior, whereby they feel like they're under siege or under attack, that may lead credence to the fact that it may be something demonic. And you're right, rarely is it a case 100% mental, 100% demonic. There can be some overlap. For example, did the person experience some type of a demonic episode which caused the mind to fracture as a way to try to comprehend what was taking place? Again, when we have an encounter with an entity that's preternatural, again, above our understanding of the natural order, that can really, I think, cause the mind to fracture or break in some ways, just trying to grasp what is truly taking place in their life.
So I have one more question along these same lines. So from a metaphysics perspective, right, we have a spirit, and then we have a physical body, and the spirit controls the physical body. It's what gives us our free will, our freedom to choose, right? So when you have a demonic entity who it's a spirit without a body, as far as I understand it, right? And they're trying to influence the physical body, what is happening there? Is this where they're kind of like a car, right? You're in a car, somebody tries to carjack the car, and they're trying to drive the car and push you into the passenger seat. Is that what's going on there from a metaphysics perspective?
I think that's a good way to look at it. From a Christian perspective, what's the greatest thing that God has done for us? It's the incarnation. God took on human form in the person of Jesus Christ. The devil, because he wishes to mimic God in every possible way, believes that he takes on human form by possessing a human body. But when the devil does that, he treats the human person as something hideous or grotesque. That's where you see these manifestations: the eyes rolled in the back of the head, the growling, the snarling, the foaming at the mouth, bodily contortions, and whatnot. The devil makes a mockery of the human person because the devil believes that by afflicting the human person, God's greatest creation, that he's indirectly afflicting God himself. But anytime somebody is possessed, all the actions of that body are now wholly defined by the demon. If I'm working with John Doe, for example, and the demon manifests, I would never say that John Doe did this or said that. I would always say that's what the demon did. Because when somebody's possessed, the demon will use the person's eyes to see, their mouth to speak, their ears to hear, and so on. So again, all the actions are now being wholly defined by the demon. Some people that I've worked with have told me that once the demonic takes over, they're aware of what's going on, but they're powerless to stop any of it. It's like they're a spectator within their own body. Other people have told me that once the manifestations begin, they no longer have any recollection of what takes place afterwards. So again, each situation can be different. Even though exorcism prayers may need to be repeated, there is some benefit that a person receives each and every time the prayers are prayed. So they receive some spiritual benefit, even if it doesn't bring about total liberation at that moment, because ultimately, God will decide the moment of liberation.
Yeah, it's in God's hands. Um, well, I have a friend here also listening, Stan, and I wanted to give him a chance to ask a question. Stan, go ahead and ask your question, Father Vincent. Stan, you there? Oh, sorry.
Okay, here we go.
There we go.
Greetings.
Hi, Stan.
Hello, Father Vincent. Hope you're doing well today. You look good. You look like you're doing well. So I recently met Kevin. I'm an atheist. We had a great conversation, and I grew up Christian my whole life. I'm about 40 years old now, and about 10 years ago, I deconstructed my views and deconverted myself from the Christianity that I was raised with. And I'm one of very few in my family that have done that. So I spoke to Kevin, and he was able to get me into listening to this because we were kind of talking about this same subject earlier yesterday, I believe it was. And I've got a question. I've been listening intently this whole time. I've got several questions, but I'll just go with this one because I know it looks like we're getting a little short on time, possibly. So earlier on, and I'm not trying to, we're all buddies here, right?
There you go.
I'm not
Ask
trying to
away.
stir the pot or anything, but you mentioned earlier when talking about the Garden of Eden, that the story of Adam and Eve and the serpent and everything, which I have 1,000 things to say about, talk about regarding that. But you said that the devil has this thing where he can propose but not impose. But later on in the discussion, you mentioned that, this demonic possession, the way it can work is kind of like, it could be total usage and manipulation of a human body by the demonic spirit, which to me, it seems very imposing. And I was trying to mentally square that circle. I was digging back into my, Christian gymnastic abilities that I honed for many years. I've argued this point all over the world myself for my own part, but I'm wondering how do you square those two things? Because to me, saying that he can only propose but not impose, but then he can also totally manipulate and control a person to where they're not even aware of their actions, they don't remember them, or they're a backseat driver and just watching it, and their body's moving around under the influence of the demon. How do those two square?
Yeah, so the devil cannot impose but only propose because we have free will. So the devil can't present something for us to make a choice for. St. Thomas Aquinas would say that every choice we make in life, we make it because we believe it to be a good. He would say that nobody chooses evil because it's evil, but we are convinced that something is a good. So go back to the story of Adam and Eve again. So with the serpent in the garden, the proposal of the forbidden fruit, the serpent didn't take the fruit and cram it down Eve's throat. He presented it as something good, even though the evil act was in violation against God. So again, it's that notion of free will. But once we submit our free will to the devil and then allow his deception to become a truth in our minds, so he's trying to objectify evil, then we invite him in. And when we give the devil, you know, consent to our free will, that's where the afflictions against us will begin. So it's that notion again of he cannot impose because we have free will, but then he wants to convince us to use our free will in such a way to act against God. And then once we step outside of the realm of God, then the devil is permitted to afflict us.
Yeah, this is an interesting thing too. I've thought a lot about this because all throughout the scripture, there's really interesting scriptures where the Bible says, Jesus says, all things are possible for him who believes. And then in Romans, it says, confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord. I always thought it was interesting that it says, confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord. And it seems like there is and you'll even hear people who are in the New Age realm, they'll say, speak to the universe and you'll get what you want. It seems like God has a creation that is very responsive to what we say and what we believe, and that you're, and this is my understanding. Correct me, Father Vincent, if you have a different understanding, but that your words are actually contractual to a large degree, and so you make a contract with God when you verbally say things to Him. You also can make a contract against God or with the devil, giving him freedom to do things that he wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And this has a lot to do with God's decision to give us the freedom to choose who we engage with, who we associate with, and not even God forces himself on us. Is that correct, Father Vincent?
Yeah, I think you're right on target with that. Yes.
Dan, what do you think about that? Is that helpful, or does that not answer your question?
I mean, I see the logic. I see the logic behind it. I mean, I still don't necessarily. Well, so if I may, if we have time,
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
this kind of does lead into another question that I had, because I found no reason to believe in the very existence of demons or the devil themselves, right? Me personally. So one of the things that I've wondered is, I wrote it down. I wrote a little note for just this occasion. So earlier we were talking, when you guys were talking about the exorcisms and the demonic activity that you've seen, Father Vincent, in your field. You mentioned things like levitation, contortion, unusual speech, things like that. And I notated it down here. It's nothing we can't see in the local circus, pretty much. This is all stuff the things that you described are things that are feasibly possible within the realm of human capability, physically, mentally.
Mm-hmm.
If there are extraordinarily convincing, tangible things, events happening behind these closed doors, behind which exorcisms occur, why is this so hidden? Why is there no reliable, tangible proof of the reality of these demonic entities and the procedures and things that you all do to combat this menace?
When you talk about tangible proof, are you discussing whether or not things are videotaped and recorded, that type of thing, to give people the proof they're looking for?
Could be video, or just having it done in public, or medical records showing impossible, or miraculous things that wouldn't be, something to show that it's beyond the mundane. I would say.
I would say, at least from the procedures that I use, the protocol that's in place, I would always begin by consulting again those experts in the mental health and medical field. I would even say that the church would do greater harm if it labels someone as being possessed, and that label prevents the person from getting the true help that they need. So again, relying on these experts. I mean, I know a little bit, but I want to rely on a psychiatrist, for example, to tell me there's something here that I can't explain. The church says I need to reach moral certitude, meaning believing beyond a doubt that the person in front of me truly is dealing with extraordinary demonic activity. So there's a very strict protocol. And you're right, a lot of the symptoms that are seen in those who are possessed are seen in people that could be suffering from a mental health condition, people with Tourette syndrome. There can be, audible outbursts, behavior that, seems rather erratic, for example. So again, the church is looking for some explanation that's outside of the mental health field. A medical doctor would do a complete, assessment of the person to make sure that they're not dealing with some type of disease or other malady, that they're not on drugs and hallucinating. So all of these things need to be dealt with. From a Catholic perspective, there is no such thing as an emergency exorcism. Again, that's the last place we get to. Every other possible explanation needs to be looked into so that the person truly gets the help that they need. Are they suffering spiritually? Are they suffering mentally? Are they suffering physically? And then by talking with myself, the medical doctor, or the psychiatrist, we're trying to put our heads together, if you will, and decide what is this person dealing with and what's the best approach to get them the help that they need.
I have a question along those same lines. And I know, Stan, we'll still pursue your question there, but um, uh, so have you ever had a psychiatrist who is not a believer? I'm sure you work with psychiatrists who aren't believers who come to you and go, whoa, this is persuasive to me that there is something spiritual going on here, even if they're not a believer. Have you ever had a situation like that where somebody is that kind of astonished by the behavior that they decide this is spiritual?
I would say my experience is that a lot of people in the mental health field are non-believers, and that's okay because I'm not trying to stack the deck in my favor. I'm not looking for somebody who believes who will tell me what I
Sure.
want to hear. Ultimately, I want to really hear a good mental assessment of what the person is dealing with. So the beliefs of that person really are secondary. But I've had psychiatrists who have chosen not to respond. I don't know if they encountered something that they couldn't explain, but they just told me that they weren't going to pursue working with the person anymore, and they would have no comment for me.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, because I've heard several stories of people who had, pretty wild experiences, and they ended up deciding, this is way beyond mental illness. And I believe it's very spiritual. I had a situation once where somebody, and I wasn't sure what to think about this, but I knew somebody who was hearing voices, and the voices were always negative. They were always horrible voices, horrible, nothing positive, very negative, and he almost through driving almost killed people, and he also would put bags over his head and do very strange things and say he was hearing voices, and I don't know, he was diagnosed with a mental disorder, but I found it strange that everything was so horribly evil that was coming out of his mouth and his mind. And that there was no positive things about seeing, I don't know what, like rainbows and unicorns or anything. And there was no joy. It was just incredibly, just some of it was really seemed very, very evil to me.
Yeah,
Um, what is that all about? Is that related to demonic activity, spiritual activity, or what are your thoughts on that?
it could be, or it could be, in working with a person, did they grow up in a very negative family, a negative
Mm,
household? So was it something reinforced within their environment? You know, I believe that evil is personified in the devil and these other evil spirits, but we should not be too quick to blame all evil on the devil. The notion that the devil made me do it again is a bad statement in my mind. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier. The devil cannot force us to do anything. He may propose something, but again, we have to make that choice. But I would also want to know, did somebody grow up in just a broken environment? Brokenness is very common within many families. Dysfunction, to me, is the norm. The question is somebody dealing with their dysfunction, or are they allowing it to control them? So again, in working with that person, I would just want to know more about their environment, and did they grow up in an abusive home? Their father was an alcoholic, or beat them, or always told them they were a loser, they could never do anything good. So again, I would try to really want to understand that situation. And then that's where, like, working with the mental health professional will come in. Again, I can only tell people what I come to believe based on all the information, the data that's gathered. I can't tell people what they want to hear. I remember talking with a man one time who believed that he was possessed. And I worked with him, even set him up with a psychiatrist in his area, and told him it wasn't demonic. It was a psychiatric issue he needed to deal with. He didn't like my answer, so he continued to search. Sadly, you're going to find somebody out there that's going to believe what you have to say. And usually they're going to tell you what you want to hear based on money. This man told me, he called me a few months later and said that he found a professional exorcist who told him he was possessed by 5 demons and charged him $1,500 each to get rid of them. Mm-hmm. And the man was so broken and desperate that he actually paid him. So that is really what's unfortunate too, is that you get people that are feeding on people's brokenness just for the sake of a buck.
Mm. And back to Stan's question, as far as he's questioning from a secular perspective, is if somebody were to sit in with you, or if this were to happen, and you mentioned people levitating and these sorts of things, is that stuff that you've actually seen, where you've seen somebody actually levitate off the ground?
I would say I didn't see them do it. I saw the demon do it. It goes back to, again, all the actions of the body once a person is possessed are being totally defined by the demon itself. Yeah, and I've witnessed all of these things over the 19 years that I've done this ministry. The church doesn't record or broadcast these things to protect the identity of the individual so as not to make a spectacle of them. What a person chooses to do afterwards, that is up to them. The movie The Exorcist that came out in 1973 was based on a story of a 14-year-old boy from Mount Rainier, Maryland. The exorcism took place in St. Louis. But that man over the years would never speak about that ever again. Even people would ask him questions, and I think Hollywood threw a lot of money at his way, and he simply shunned all of that and just would not speak of it anymore. So to me, it's something very personal, and what somebody wants to do with that is up to them again. Because ultimately, a good way to look at it is, when the church performs an exorcism, we want to turn on the light of Christ. There may be people that want to turn on the cameras, if you will, but that's really not the light we're looking for. It's really the light of Christ. It's really about bringing a person to faith. I think there's a lot of people today that just have again, in my mind, a very distorted image of God. And because of that distorted image of God, I think we have a lot of people questioning their faith and really asking the question, what do I believe? Do I believe? And, even within Christianity, we can argue amongst ourselves about, who's better, I'm right, you're wrong, and not that type of thing. But at the end of the day, I don't think any of us get to say, I have a bigger piece of God than you do. Because I think we're all God's children. I'm one of 9 children. But when I think of all these, other Christian faith traditions, to me, we're like children of the same family. We have the same parent, who is God, but how we live out that relationship with God is different. Just like any child within a family will have a different relationship with their parent than their siblings will. So again, to me, it's not about competition. It's about recognizing that we're all God's children. And sometimes some of God's children are being afflicted with evil in a very profound way. And the ministry of exorcism is simply a way to reach out to them, to give them pastoral care and guidance, and to help bring them back into the fold of God, if you will.
Father
Can I make a
Vincent,
comment?
we're almost out of time here, but I wanted to ask you in closing, if there's a person listening and they're struggling with what they believe is demonic influence in their own life or in a family member's life, what advice would you give them as far as what next steps should they take in order to begin to get healing from this?
I think the number one place that people should turn is to their own home church to talk to their pastor. It's like if we're sick, we're going to reach out to our family doctor and have some type of evaluation. And then the family doctor may refer that person to a specialist, if you will. Because I think a lot of people that think they need to see an exorcist can have the majority of their issues resolved by going to talk to their pastor, who can listen to them, who can pray with them, and then to give them that pastoral care and guidance that they need. But I think a lot of people, maybe they're not really engaged with their home church. Maybe they don't really know their pastor, but this would be a good opportunity to go in and say, hey, this is who I am. This is what I'm struggling with, and I'm seeking your counsel. I will say that, people, if you tell your pastor that you're dealing with the demonic, you're probably not going to get a good response, because some pastors simply don't know how to deal with this. It would be better off to say, I'm suffering spiritually, and this is what's happening, and I'm seeking your guidance. When people self-diagnose and they go in and say, hey, I'm possessed, I need an exorcism, things usually don't go well after that. They're not listened to, doors closed, phone calls are not answered, emails are ignored. But again, simply to go in and say, I'm suffering spiritually and I'm seeking some pastoral care and guidance.
That's wonderful. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time. This has been a really big blessing talking to you and very insightful. So thank you so much for everything you do, Father Vincent.
All right, Kevin. Thank you. Thank you, Stan.
Yeah, and thanks, Stan, for being here too. I'm sure we'll have a great follow-up discussion later on. So it's been a pleasure being with both of you guys. So God bless you. And for those of you listening, thanks for being here. We've got some great shows coming up down the road here too. I hope you can join us. And I just pray that God would bless your life. So thanks again for being here, and we'll see you next time.
When you need tires or service, count on Conover Tires, Wheels, and Service in Oceanside for a full range of affordable options and all the brands you trust. See their great customer reviews and special offers online. Hours Tuesday through Friday, 7:30 to 5:30, and Saturdays, 7:30 to 5. Call Dan and his team at 760-439-1631. Conover Tires, Wheels, and Service, 2405 Oceanside Boulevard in Oceanside, 760-439-1631.
How can you live in San Diego and miss out on enjoying the water? Fast Lane Kayaking sells popular Hobie Cat kayaks that you pedal, not paddle. That means your hands are left free for fishing and fun. Just throw these on your roof rack. They're light and they're easy to use and maintain. Just rinse them off. Try one free on a demo ride. For 36 years, Ron and Debbie Lane have served San Diego with fun, family-friendly water sports of all kinds. Learn more. FastLaneSailing.com. 619-222-0766.
Hi, this is Jason Hall, president of Team Home Loans, a branch of Synergy One Lending. I just want to take this opportunity to thank Kevin Conover for the profound impact he's had on mine and my wife's spiritual life, as well as being an incredible teacher while our kids were his students. His knowledge and passion have taught us all how important it is to be defenders of our faith. It's our honor and privilege to support Kevin and his show. It is our sincere hope and prayer that you will continue to learn to be defenders of your faith through Kevin's radio show and through his Educate for Life teachings. Thank you, Kevin, from the Hall family and Team Home Loans.
Educate for Life helps you build your life on the rock. LG Equipment helps builders build on good soil. Luke Gibson's team at LG Equipment is your local source for grading, demolition, hauling, and more. Learn about their bulk water services, from trucks to tankers to towers, at rentwatertower.com. Get your questions answered. Call LG Equipment at 619-988-0924. Learn more at lgequipment.com. 619-988-0924.